Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. Yeah, I know it's been quite some time. Um, I've more or less been taking a little bit of a break during the summer off season for TV, just focusing on movie reviews. But just so you know, the TV season is going to start up surprisingly soon, and of course, I've been trying to keep up with what's going on in terms of sort of superhero-y things on Netflix. Um, but anyway, that's all for a different time. Rest assured, activity on the channel will pick back up once the fall TV season kicks off. But for right now, I actually wanted to take a little time to share a few thoughts on Netflix's Castlevania series. And yes, I know I'm quite late to the party on this one. Honestly, I completely forgot that this was coming out. And then when it did come out, I took a long time to actually get down to watching all of it. And then other things have been drawing my focus, both professionally and personally lately. But I had some extra free time today, so I decided, well, let's kind of get this out. So I'm not really someone super familiar with Castlevania lore. Actually played a little bit of the original and Castlevania 2. I beat the original Castlevania, if I remember. Yeah, the original Castlevania back in the day when I was a kid, which kind of gives you an idea of how old I am. And I admit to being quite pleased with myself when I beat that game. It was a lot of fun, but it was definitely a challenge. Um, the Netflix here is something that sort of takes some of the core ideas of Castlevania and it makes it its own thing. And they were very smart to go to Warren Ellis to write this series, I think. Warren is a man I've been a fan of for, geez, more than 20 years since I discovered his work back in the 90s. Again, hinting at how old I really am. Where he's did a lot of really great work as a comic book writer. He's done quite a bit of other writing for animation. He's written a novel or two, which he's done a web comic. I mean, he's a guy who really does diversify. And there's very little that he's written that I have not thoroughly enjoyed. And this series is very much in Warren's trademark style. He knows how to well, he's not a man who's afraid of a little bit of profanity, and certainly knows how to make a creative insult uh, come out of a character's mouth. But he's also very good at investing real heart and real emotion in characters that you might not necessarily consider to be likable in the traditional sense. Dracula, who's the real focus of the first episode, is instilled with a lot of quite a bit of humanity, especially given that you also are introduced to Lisa. And oh yeah, I'm gonna try to keep this relatively spoiler free, but I am going to talk about some of the characters a little bit. I'm not going to get hugely into it, but do consider this somewhat mild spoilers. Um, and just sort of like, well, why does Dracula want to do all these bad things? And he really does a nice job of kind of laying it out. Well, why does Dracula want to do all these terrible things? And it's hard not to sympathize with him. You know, Dracula is a man who was horribly wronged by the world, and it's understandable that he would want to make the world suffer as he has. Um, I also like how what Warren does with Trevor, um, and it's a very simple story at the end of the day, a very traditional, sort of person deciding to get off their butt and be a hero. But it's you don't really have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. You just have to put the characters through enough where you can believe that this previously genuinely apathetic person has come to the realization that no, I'm not going to stand by anymore. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do something about it. And he sells that journey for Trevor very, very well. You know, Trevor is a very flawed man, but at the end of the day, he's a very, very skilled man, and that he takes this heritage of his family extraordinarily seriously. It is the one real thing that is truly, truly precious to him. And you know, I especially like that line that about how, you know, I've never been afraid to die, which just sort of really kind of sells you on what it must be like to be a Belmont. Um, Nothing really particular to say about Alucard. I don't really think we get enough time to really get a huge reading on him as a character, especially since it's really the we only really get to spend like one episode with him in any sort of really prominent role. Now, we do kind of get a little bit of where he's coming from and why he's he ultimately is trying to help rather than help the heroes rather than his father. Still, you know, I kind of wish we'd had a little more time to get to know him and his character. I think a little too much fighting with them, not enough characterization. But again, there's only 4 episodes to this series, so you don't even really come up with like an hour and a half. So you kind of have to grant some things with that. Silpha, again, I'm not really somebody with a great deal of Castlevania lore knowledge. I take it she's somebody from the games. I know nothing about her. But here, she is laid out nicely. She seems to come, I think, pretty clearly from sort of the Warren Ellis mold of female characters. You know, that she is ultimately, at the end of the day, pretty badass, pretty snarky, but it's hard not to ultimately end up liking her. And her interplay with Trevor, I mean, it's really nicely done, and it's very entertaining to see the two of them together. And another thing that I really like about this series is that, you know, I mean, it really does pull no punches. I mean, there's a part where you see a demon with a dead baby in its mouth, which, again, really drives it home that, you know, this, and along with all the violence and foul language, that, you know, Netflix is not effing around with this. They're really committed to just making this something for adults. Something like that is also quite classic Warren Ellis. Warren's never been afraid to go for the grisly image, the shocking moment, just the ugliness and brutality of something. But what I like about him is that most of the time he's able to make it use that sort of thing in such a way that it really does feel like a natural part of the story, as compared to some other writers I could name, but will not, where it's just sort of like, hey, I'm going to show you something shocking. Yeah, the only time that that sort of thing and Warren have never really quite worked for me is that Ruins miniseries that he did for Marvel, which took place in an extraordinarily dark alternate Marvel reality. Big Marvel person, if you can't guess. And it just sort of felt like somebody was just sort of like, I'm going to go and I'm really just going to poke as many holes in the Marvel universe as I can. And I think this might have, you know what, you don't want to hear me sit here and complain about a comic book miniseries from a million years ago. We're here to talk about Castlevania. So, at the end of the day, Castlevania, I mean, it's good. It takes a bit to kind of get up and running, but it ultimately tells a simple but effective story, setting up the plot for future seasons with our 3 main characters teaming up to take down Dracula. Again, it's a simple story that sets up the bigger conflict that's going to come in the future. And it's been confirmed that they're going to do a second, longer season of this. I believe 8 episodes is what's been announced. So, even if you're like me, you're not super familiar with Castlevania, or even if you don't really know it at all, it's very easy to come in there and enjoy it. for people who are kind of interested in that sort of dark fantasy kind of thing. The sort of fantasy world where they don't really pull any punches. I mean, obviously, I'm taking a little bit of inspiration from Game of Thrones, I'm sure, but frankly, if you want a better analogy, a better comparison, I really do think that something like Dragon Age would be a much, much better comparison to what we're getting with Castlevania. And I seriously doubt it was a coincidence that Dracula and Trevor are both voiced by veterans of the Lord of the Rings movies. But anyway, Castlevania does a nice job of telling an enjoyable, dark fantasy story that definitely leaves you wanting more. The characters are at times a bit thin. I've complained we really don't get much of Alucard. Silpha has some good stuff going on, and forgive me if I'm saying that wrong. But at the end of the day, it really is the story of Trevor. And I do like that they did take the time to, kind of flesh Dracula out. It does what it sets out to do, and it does it well. I walked away from these final episodes saying, like, man, I really can't wait to see some more of this. And if a show or a movie does that, then I don't see how you can't not call it a success. So if this is the kind of dark fantasy with a little bit of humor thrown in there to keep things from getting too grimdark is what you're looking for, then Castlevania will serve your needs quite nicely. So with that said, guys, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi, and please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Incidentally, I've also launched a second channel. I've only had it up and running for a few days. I'm still kind of getting all my ducks in a row with it. This channel is called Gaijin Gaiden. It's Gaijingaiden. And if you didn't know, I happen to live in Japan. And this is a place where I'm just going to be talking about what it's like to live in Japan. I don't live in Tokyo, and that sort of Tokyo lifestyle seems to be the focus of a great many people's what it's like in Japan videos. That being the case, in fact, I live quite far from Tokyo. I wanted to sort of focus on more sort of just the ordinary life, the nitty-gritty of what the little things that people don't really talk too much about what it's like to live in Japan. And I think it's going to be quite the fun little adventure for everybody involved. So if that sounds like something that might be of interest to you, please, please, please do join me. Until next time, then, take care and have a good one.